Today we're looking at the Freedmen's Bureau, sharecropping, and black codes. Hello and welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. In the wake of the American Civil War, the nation entered into a time period called Reconstruction, in which the nation was attempting to piece itself back together after 4 years of bloody fighting. An integral part of Reconstruction was the extension of rights to former enslaved African Americans. Through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, slavery was abolished and rights were guaranteed. Unfortunately, however, despite official changes to the U.S. Constitution, racism and discrimination still existed, and fair treatment of African Americans was by no means guaranteed. Some did seek to aid former enslaved people, while others sought to keep former enslaved people in a state of slavery. One important measure that was taken to help former enslaved people was the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau on March 3rd of 1865, just as the 13th Amendment had passed Congress to abolish slavery, and barely a month before Lee would surrender to Grant, effectively ending the Civil War. With the war coming to an end and the 13th Amendment on its way to ratification, the government began to realize that there would be now over 4 million former enslaved people seeking work, a home, land, medical care, education, basically all of the rights and privileges that they had been denied by slavery. The Freedmen's Bureau goal was to aid in the transition and help former enslaved African Americans as well as some poor whites in the South in establishing themselves. The Bureau was put under the control of the War Department, as many former Union soldiers who fought in the war now found themselves working in the Bureau, attempting to help those left homeless after the war. The Bureau helped in providing food, medical care, clothing, housing, finding work for former enslaved people, and even opened schools to educate those who had been denied an education. The Bureau helped former enslaved people find family members that they had been separated from because of slavery. But again, racism and discrimination was rampant in the areas in which the Freedmen's Bureau operated, and so organizations such as the newly formed Ku Klux Klan attacked those working for the Bureau and burned schools operated by the Bureau. The Bureau suffered from lack of money, as many political leaders such as President Andrew Johnson argued against the Bureau and vetoed legislation to further fund it. This led to years of argument and debate in Washington over the Bureau's work, and by 1872 the Bureau came to an end. As I mentioned earlier, some sought to help former enslaved people, while others sought to keep them in a state of slavery. One popular method of this was what was called sharecropping. As the war came to an end, large landowners in the South found themselves without really any money and no labor force to operate their large plantations. The plantation owners created an arrangement in which they provided former enslaved African Americans a place to live, they gave them seeds to plant, and farming tools to work with. But in return, the landowner would get a share of the crops that were harvested. Of course, since the landowner had to borrow money, they bought seeds and tools on credit and went into debt. They then, of course, passed this debt on to the sharecropper. The landowner could then lie about the cost of materials or the value of the sharecropper's harvest, and so now the sharecropper was in a virtual state of slavery to the landowner and would have to borrow from the landowner. And, as the Bible verse says, the borrower is slave to the lender. There were other variations of this system, such as shared tenancy and tenant farming, which offered more choice and freedom to former enslaved people, but nonetheless, former enslaved African Americans remained at a very low status economically in the Southern society. Despite the fact that slavery had been abolished, former Confederate states began passing laws within their own states that heavily discriminated against former enslaved African Americans. These laws became known as black codes, basically trampling the rights of former enslaved people. These codes included laws such as African Americans and whites could not intermarry, African Americans could not serve on juries or could not testify in court against a white man, could not own land, and also required African Americans to sign contracts with landowners to work on their land, for example, in a sharecropping situation. And then, if they did not have a contract, they could be declared a vagrant and arrested. Congress, of course, attempted to intervene with the actions of the Freedmen's Bureau and the passage of the 14th Amendment, which attempted, guarantee citizenship to former enslaved people and guaranteed protecting their rights. These measures aided in overthrowing many of the black codes. Unfortunately, however, as time went on and into the late 1800s, enforcement of the 14th Amendment and protection of rights began to grow weaker as many former Confederate states began passing what were known as Jim Crow laws that discriminated against African Americans and sought to take away their rights. The period of Reconstruction would have long-lasting impacts on American society that we feel even to this day. As with any period in history, there are good and bad lessons to learn, and it's up to us to look at these events and form a better future. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.